When the war broke out, women's role became even more important, because all those men who went off to join the army, who was managing their farms? Who was managing their blacksmith shops? Who was taking care of their printing establishment? Their wives were. And you have to try to picture what it was like to be a woman in the 18th century. Most white women were pregnant every 2.5 years until they could be pregnant no more. So when their husband kissed them goodbye and went off to join the army, they were probably pregnant. They had a 3-year-old child. Maybe they had a baby in their arms. They had several other children, and they couldn't order pizza in for dinner. They couldn't go to the corner store and pick up a Duncan Hines cake recipe. They had to literally transform raw materials into finished products in order to put food on the table. And so they had massive numbers of household chores. They weren't polishing their polish. They weren't decorating the table. They were churning butter. They were making cider. They were turning flax into cloth. They were processing raw materials so that their family could survive. Housewifery, as they called it in colonial America, was an all-day long job. In fact, women in colonial America were notorious for having filthy homes because they didn't have time to clean and dust. They were busy doing important things to feed and clothe their family. So their husband goes off and he says, "Take care of the farm, honey." So now she had all of her chores and she had his chores as well. For most women, this was not a liberating experience. I always have students who say, "Oh, women must have been really happy to be able to run the farm." No, they were not happy, but they knew it was their job. Some women, if they had enough money to hire employees to work in the field, did experience an incredible transformation. And we know this from our favorite, if you're a colonial historian, this is our favorite set of letters. Husband goes off to England, he's a loyalist, and he leaves the farm in his wife's hands. And he writes her detailed letters. "This is what you do with my crop. This is how you plant my crop. This is what you do with my farm." And she writes back in the first 6 months, "Don't worry, dear, your farm is doing just fine." 6 months later, he writes, "How is my farm doing?" She writes back, "Our farm is doing really well." 6 months later, he writes, "How is my farm?" And she writes back, "My farm is doing fabulously." So clearly more has changed in her mind than just the pronouns. But for most women, this was a tremendous chore. And it was made even worse by the fact that as soon as the war broke out, scarcity came in. That is, most of the things that people needed, pins, plows, soap, came from England, and it stopped coming from England. And so women had to improvise. They figured out that they could preserve meat for the winter using walnut ash instead of salt. Must have tasted terrible, but it worked. And so they had to share with one another how to make soap out of the few things that they had available so that they could wash and clean things.